Every parent teaches their children something. We teach them to ride a bike. We teach them to cross the street. We teach them how to drive. But I started asking myself a different question. Am I teaching my daughters how to think about money? Am I teaching them how to make decisions that will affect the rest of their lives? Because one day they'll be sitting on the other side of desks, signing documents, making financial decisions, and I don't want those rooms to feel unfamiliar. That's why I brought my daughters to my NACA intake appointment. Not because I expected them to understand mortgages, not because I expected them to remember every conversation. I simply wanted them to experience being in the room, to hear the language, to see the process, to realize that building a future doesn't happen by accident. It starts with showing up. Why they were there. I've always believed there are certain doors children should walk through long before they're responsible for making the decisions behind them. Business meetings, real estate appointments, investment conversations, financial planning. Those environments shouldn't feel foreign when they're adults. They should feel familiar. In our house, my daughters don't get their iPads during the week. On Fridays, before they get them back, they have one assignment. They have to give me 5 positive things happening in the economy and 5 challenges the economy is facing. I don't tell them where to find the information. They can use a book, they can watch the news, they can even use tools like ChatGPT. The goal isn't to memorize facts. The goal is to learn how to ask questions. Why are the interest rates changing? Why are groceries more expensive? What causes inflations? Why do some companies grow while others struggle? I'm not trying to raise economists. I'm trying to raise critical thinkers because one day they'll make decisions about careers, buying a home, investing, raising their own families. And I want those decisions to come from understanding, not fear. So bringing them to my NACA intake meeting wasn't just about mortgages. It was another lesson, another opportunity to expose them to conversations they'll eventually have themselves. Because the more they hear, the more familiar those conversations become. And as they listened that day, they were also listening to something else, the strategy I had spent months developing for our family's future. And that strategy centered around one type of property, an REO. My strategy. Going into my intake meeting, I believe I had a clear strategy. I wasn't searching for the biggest house. I wasn't chasing the newest neighborhood. And I wasn't looking for a move-in ready home with every upgrade already completed. I was looking for opportunity. More specifically, I was targeting REO properties. If you're not familiar with the term, REO stands for real estate owned. These are homes that have gone through foreclosure and are now owned by the bank. Banks don't want to own houses. Their business is lending money. So their goal is to sell these properties and move them off their books. Many of these homes need repairs. Because of that, many traditional buyers move on. Even flippers and investors sometimes walk away when their repair costs, holding costs, and unexpected surprises make the numbers no longer work. That's where I believe there was an opportunity. Instead of competing for a fully renovated home at market price, I wanted to look at a home other buyers have already passed over. If I can purchase one below market value, and if the needed repairs qualify through NACA's hand department, and rehab escrow, those eligible repairs could become part of the loan instead of coming entirely out of pocket after closing. To me, this wasn't about buying a damaged house. It was about creating value, buying below market, improving the property over time, and building equity through smart decisions instead of paying top dollar for a finished house. Most importantly, I wasn't trying to buy the most expensive house I could qualify for. I wanted a home with a mortgage that can allow my family to grow financially after we move in. A mortgage should create stability, not consume every dollar coming into the house. I wanted room to continue investing, room to keep saving, room for unexpected expenses, and room to enjoy life without constantly worrying about the next mortgage payment. That was the strategy I walked into the meeting with. When I explained my thinking, my counselor understood exactly what I was trying to accomplish. She wasn't diminishing the idea. She simply explained why NACA doesn't typically encourage members to pursue that path. Distressed properties can come with hidden structural issues, unexpected repairs, longer timelines, and higher costs, and the added stress of managing contractors and renovations before you truly settle into your home. Everything she said was reasonable. She wasn't saying my strategy couldn't work. She was making sure I understood the risks, and I appreciated that perspective because making good financial decisions isn't about hearing only opinions you agree with. It's about understanding the risks, weighing your options, and choosing the path that best fits your long-term goals. The pivot. As our conversation continued, my counselor explained something that really made me stop and think. From her perspective, one solution was fairly straightforward. Simply qualify for a larger mortgage, around $5,000 a month. Now, for some people, that may be perfectly reasonable. Everyone's financial situation is different. But for me, this isn't the future I'm trying to build. You see, this isn't my first experience with home ownership. Back in the 1990s, I purchased my first home for about $215,000. Like many first time buyers, I worked hard, invested in the property, and over the years built equity. When I eventually sold that home, it sold for approximately $645,000. That experience taught me what home ownership can do when you're patient and make smart decisions. Later, I purchased my second home in the Oakland Hills for around $800,000. On paper, everything looked fine. I had a career, I had income, I had a plan. Then life changed. The company I worked for outsourced our network operations work to India. Almost overnight, the financial picture changed, and that home became part of the subprime housing crisis that so many families experienced. Losing that home wasn't just a financial loss, it taught me something I never forgot. A mortgage isn't just a monthly payment, it's pressure, it's responsibility, it's stress. And when life changes unexpectedly, that pressure doesn't disappear, it gets heavier. So when I heard the idea of taking on another $5,000 mortgage, I wasn't just looking at the number. I was remembering what that number feels like. I've lived it before. And at this stage of my life, that's not the road I want to go back down. As we drove home that afternoon, I wasn't discouraged. In fact, I was grateful for the conversation. It forced me to think differently, not about my destination, but about the strategy. Home ownership was still the goal. That hadn't changed. What changed was how I planned to get there. That's when it became clear. I didn't need to abandon my plan. I simply needed to redirect it. That realization became the most valuable thing I took away from the entire meeting. Redirecting my capital. Once I realized my strategy needed to change, the next question became, what should I do while I continue working towards homeownership? For about a year and a half, I had been intentionally building consistent savings. That wasn't accidental. One of the requirements in the NACA program is demonstrating a history of consistent savings and responsible financial habits. So, month after month, I set aside money with one purpose in mind: preparing for home ownership. That money had done exactly what I needed it to do. It helped establish the saving history I wanted to demonstrate. But after my intake meeting, I realized something. My journey wasn't ending. It was simply taking a different path. And while I continued moving forward with that goal, I didn't want those dollars sitting in an account doing very little. I wanted them working. So I made a decision. I transferred those savings into my brokerage account. Not because I had given up on buying a home, quite the opposite. I was still preparing for home ownership. I simply wanted my money to continue growing while I refined my strategy. To me, that's what adapting looks like. The destination stayed exactly the same: home ownership. The strategy changed. Instead of letting money sit still, I wanted every dollar working towards that same long term goal. That decision naturally led me to my next question. If my money was going to work, how did I want it invested? My investment process. Now that I'd redirected my strategy, the next question became, how do I want this money working for me? Now, before I go any further, I want to be clear. This isn't financial advice. I'm simply sharing how I approach my own situation. So, the first decision I made was to invest through ETFs. Why? Because ETFs gives me exposure to multiple companies instead of relying on just one. To me, that offers diversification while still providing the opportunity for long-term growth. It also gives my money a better chance to grow than simply sitting in a savings account while I continue working towards homeownership. I started by researching about 10 ETFs, then narrowed that list to 5, and eventually down to my top 3. Not because they're guaranteed to succeed, but because they're best match for my long term strategy. Then something interesting happened. The market started pulling back. Strong companies and ETFs I had already been watching were falling along with the rest of the market. Many people see this as bad news. I saw it differently. If a quality investment becomes available at a fair price, or even a discounted price, that creates opportunity. That's why I set 52-week low alerts on investments I had already researched. When several of those alerts triggered, I opened positions. Some were ETFs, some were individual stocks. Not because I believed I had perfectly timed the market, but because they were investments I wanted to own for the long term. Does that eliminate risk? Of course not. Every investment carries risk, but I don't automatically see a falling market as something to fear. If my research hasn't changed, sometimes a lower price simply creates a better opportunity. I also kept buying power in reserve. because opportunities don't usually all arrive all at once. That's the strategy I've chosen for myself. It may not be right for everyone, and I'm not suggesting anyone follow it. I'm simply documenting my journey, sharing my thought process, and explaining the decisions I make as I continue working towards the same destination, home ownership. Why this matters to my daughters. Everything I shared in this video, strategy, the research, the investments, none of it happens without my daughters being part of the journey. They have a front row seat and participation is required. When we're researching investments, they're there. When we're discussing companies, they're there. When we're reviewing our decisions, they're there. Sometimes they even help me place a buy order. And I always tell them the same thing. We're doing this for our family. Because I believe families are stronger when they learn together. Wisdom shared is powerful. Trying to figure everything out by yourself isn't impossible. It's just harder. Now, do I expect my daughters to understand ETFs at 8 and 11 years old? Of course not. That's not the goal. The goal is exposure. The goal is repetition. The goal is giving them experience today that will make sense years from now. Maybe one day they'll remember sitting in the NACA office. Maybe they'll remember watching me research investments. Maybe they'll remember asking questions around the dinner table. Those moments may not seem important today, but over time, they add up. Just like investing, just like building a home, just like building a future. The payoff isn't supposed to happen today. The payoff comes years later. And if one day they walk into those rooms with confidence instead of fear, then every conversation, every question, and every lesson will have been worth it. In closing, my homeownership journey didn't end at that intake meeting. It simply took a different path. The destination is still the same, home ownership. The strategy has changed, and my daughters will be with me every step of the way. They'll have a front row seat. They'll ask questions. They'll learn. They'll grow. Not because I expect them to understand everything today, but because I believe the lessons we build over time are the ones that last the longest. So as this journey continues, I'll share every decision, every adjustment, every success, and every setback. I'll also continue documenting my experience with the NACA program, explaining the process, clearing up common misconceptions, and sharing what I learned along the way. If you're going through the NACA program yourself, or you're simply curious about the journey, I hope you'll follow along. Everything will be organized in the Home Ownership Journey playlist, so you can see each step from beginning to end as it unfolds. Because this channel isn't just about buying a house. It's about building a future. It's about learning together. It's about preparing the next generation to make better financial decisions than we did. And showing my daughters, and maybe even a few of you watching, that with patience, preparation, and a willingness to adapt, the destination doesn't have to change. Sometimes only the strategy does.